Thank you. Welcome to everyone joining us here today, lovers of history, social justice, and New York City. I'm Barbaralee Diamonstein-Spielvogel, the chair of the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center, a group of dedicated individuals committed to informing the public about the past, present, and future of historic preservation in our city. We are gathered today to celebrate the life and work of David Dubinsky, a renowned labor leader and longtime president of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. Our warmest thanks to each of our collaborators, especially Jay Mazur for the ILGWU 21st Century Heritage Foundation's generous support of this program. Thanks also to Ed Lewis, who reached out to his fellow residents here at 201 West 16th Street to help support this cultural medallion. To Lynn Wagonek, who resides in Mr. Dubinsky's former apartment, for connecting us with Ed, and most of all to Rina Siegel, whose love and dedication for her grandfather, David Dubinsky, has been a catalyst for this event. A reminder to all of you that this event is being videotaped and will be available to the public via YouTube and iTunes as part of the Diamonstein-Spielvogel video archives that are housed at the Rare Book and Manuscript Library, the David Rubenstein Library at Duke University. And now for our program. Our honoree, David Dubinsky, served as president of the ILGWU for more than 30 years. During his tenure, he was responsible for pulling the union from the brink of bankruptcy and transforming it into a national and international force, while ensuring that the ILGWU remained, under his stewardship, a meaningful influence and responsive entity in the lives of its workers. Our speakers will tell you in greater detail about the life and work of David Dubinsky, but in brief, his was a story that reflects the countless contributions made to our country by immigrants. Born in Tsarist Russia at the age of 13, he joined his father's shop as a master baker. Due to his knowledge of languages, he was elected at the age of 15 as secretary of his local bakers' union and helped organize, what else, a strike. Exiled to Siberia, because of his politics, he escaped and made his way to New York, where in 1911 he was hired as a cutter in the garment industry and joined Local 10 of the ILGWU. Only 7 years later, he joined Local 10's executive board, and by 1932 was the ILGWU president. Under his leadership, the ILGWU led the way in transparency to its members and to the public, fighting corruption by publishing its financial statements long before it was legally required. It led the way in supporting not only its workers, but supporting the garment industry itself, establishing research and engineering departments to improve the efficiency of the garment trade. It helped improve the lives of its workers not only at their jobs, but at home, creating educational and cultural programs for thousands of members. During his presidency, the membership reached, at its peak, 450,000. Dubinsky's contribution to the labor movement did not go unnoticed. In January 1969, he was honored with the highest civilian award of the United States, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. in 1993, he was inducted posthumously into the United States Labor Hall of Honor. Today, as we place, for generations to come, this cultural medallion in his honor, we also commemorate David Dubinsky's tireless efforts to improve the lives of hundreds of thousands of workers, his brothers and sisters in solidarity. And now for our distinguished speakers. Professor of History, Barbaralee is a charter faculty member at York College of the City University of New York, where he has taught since it opened in 1967. He's the author of numerous articles and 4 books, including The Master of 7th Avenue, David Dubinsky, and the American Labor Movement.
Thank you.
Which is regarded as the definitive study of Dubinsky's life. Since 1991, he has served on the executive board of the New York Labor History Association and was recently honored by the Organization of American Historians for 50 years membership and awarded honorary lifetime membership of the American Historical Association. Please welcome Robert Farmer.
Thank you, Mrs. Diamonstein-Spielvogel, thank you, and greetings everyone. I think you did some research too, and plenty of research, which I'm very, very happy to see. And let me say here about David Dubinsky. I can never remember being apart from him. He was an important influence in my household. My cloak and suit operator father would often speak of him. Justice, the Union newspaper, was in our household. At Unity House, the Union Resort, I saw him on the screen in With These Hands, the Union movie. And I even caught a glimpse of him in person, seated outside the Unity House dining room, playing gin rummy, for which he was famous. However, that was a long time ago. I was something like 11. It really took years of study to appreciate this man fully. And what I found was a human dynamo. I've always remarked to the curator at the HLPC archives, Bob Lazar, that this man was extraordinary, doing everything, traveling everywhere. Here, there, amazing. Yes, he was an escapee from Tsarist Russia. Yes, he did become a garment cutter and somehow make his way up to the presidency of the ILGWU. Rescuing the Union from bankruptcy, absolutely, and also, and he would be the first to say, benefiting from Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, as membership skyrocketed. And as it skyrocketed, Dubinsky became a household name, along with others in the labor movement. You miss people like that today. And as he did, he branched out into other areas. One area, international affairs. When Adolf Hitler was coming to power, Germany, David Dubinsky was involved with the Jewish Labor Committee in an economic boycott of goods from Nazi Germany. David Dubinsky was also instrumental in the rescue of Jewish and other socialist labor leaders from Nazism. Then too, he was instrumental in the creation of industrial unionism and the Federation. Dubinsky was part of the group of union leaders that rebelled against the conservatism of the American Federation of Labor, a rebellion that led to the formation of the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO. Dubinsky never took his ILGW into that, but what he did do was work for quite a while to bring about a peaceful reconciliation of the two labor federations, the AFL and the CIO, which came about in 1955 and which still exists. That itself was an achievement right there, unification of the labor movement. Then too, this man was involved in politics, involved in helping Franklin Roosevelt to have a second ballot line in 1936 in New York State with the formation of an American Labor Party. And then later on, in 1944, guess what? There was a liberal party in New York State, which really served as an important power in politics for several years and helped such people, whose names I think you know: Harry Truman, John Kennedy, Lyndon Baines Johnson. There's a famous photograph of Lyndon Johnson, big Lyndon Johnson, towering over David Dubinsky, helping him with his coat, really at the White House. Incredible photo. Oh boy, I love that. But they loved each other. Amazing, right there. David Dubinsky also had a kind of personal war with communism. He fought communists internally within the ILG in the 1920s. He maintained his vigilance through the 30s to the 40s and was instrumental with others from the AFL and organized labor in helping to save Western Europe from communism. We're talking here about France and Italy in particular. Read about the April 1948 elections in Italy, and you have some evidence of Dubinsky's influence right there in keeping Italy from going communist. That was extremely important. Then too, David Dubinsky came from a Bundist background. This really meant that he was not a Zionist. But we take a look, and what we see is that in the 1920s and 1930s, ILGers, various locals, supported Jewish settlement in Palestine. Very much so. They worked with the Labor Federation, the Jewish Labor Federation, Histadrut. And then, following the Second World War, guess what? David Dubinsky became an ardent supporter of the founding of Israel. He assisted Israel and was honored by Israel. His name is revered in Israel today. Dubinsky was identified with the leadership of labor, also with social unionism, another major area here. And certainly as a kid, whose grossing, idea of grossing is which my family could not afford, was Unity House, we appreciated that. That's in the past, but Penn Station South is still here, and it stands tall for everybody. In 1937, ILGers produced a musical review, Pins and Needles. In that review, they sang, "It's Better with a Union Man." Guess what? Things were indeed better with David Dubinsky, the extraordinary labor leader we are honoring today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. After graduating from high school in 1951, J. Mazer began work in the Health and Welfare Department of New York City's Dressmakers Local 22, where after 1 year in intensive program at the ILGW's Training Institute, he began his rise through the ranks of the Union. In 1977, he became a vice president, was elected secretary-treasurer in 1983, and in 1986 was elected president. From 1986 to 1995, as president, Mazer led major campaigns to stem the decline of garment manufacturing in the United States. Under his leadership, the ILGWU merged with the Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers of America and formed UNITE, the Union of Needle Trades, Industrial and Textile Employees. He was the first president of UNITE from 1995 until 2001. And a warm, not warm enough in this cold weather, welcome to you, Jay Mazer.
I was hoping that my introduction would not be longer than my speech. Thank you, Barbaralee. I have a copy of that photo you alluded to, and I sent one up to the archive at Cornell. And so I will be brief. It's cold. David Dubinsky is a national leader of foresight and compassion. He has advanced the cause of the working man in America and the broader cause of social justice in the world. With unfailing skill and uncommon distinction, the American people are richer for the service he has given them. That was a citation on the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest honor one can bestow on a civilian. It's quite impressive. I was there for a subsequent citation to Evelyn Dubrow, another one of our vice presidents. It's the only union where two of our officers, Dubinsky and Evie Dubrow, received such a medal, and it's quite impressive. It's at the White House. The president presents the medal himself with a number of other people, in this case, people like Cy Vance and Gregory Peck from all parts of America and all phases of industry and so on. And it's very impressive. But that certainly characterizes Dubinsky and their eloquent testimony to the life and deeds of David Dubinsky. Now, I knew David Dubinsky. Can't tell you everything I know, but he was a remarkable leader. My friend here gave half my speech, which is fine, saves me time in terms of the history. But he was remarkable in every respect. Strong, energetic. You said he was a lot of energy. His whole life was the Union. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Except when he was playing poker at the House of Chan. But the Union was his life. And he came here with a sense of dedication. For him, the Union was a mission. In the ILG, we practiced a certain kind of labor religion. It was called social unionism. He was a strong believer that the Union went beyond the shop floor and the shop door. They were concerned with the total human being. Not only with their wages, their hours, their working conditions, which he fought for. And he was a major, major negotiator. But he was concerned with the member in terms of where they lived, how they lived, with the arts. He was one of those people who helped save Carnegie Hall. So Urach came to him and asked him for help, and he was a major supporter. He met with Leopold Stokowski when they were forming the American Symphony Orchestra. Gave him $50,000, then told Stokowski he wanted the tickets. And then he sold them to the locals. And I stood in front of the Carnegie Hall giving them away. Never sold them, gave them away. So that he was interested in the totality of the member, their education, their culture, their history, their housing. The ILG houses, now called Penn South, 1,700 families. The housing down at the Lower East Side called Corliss Hook, all sponsored by the ILG, and very slower than the banks provided. In fact, when they were building a building, they didn't have air conditioning. They came back for another $4 or $5 million of it. course, we lent it to them. It's union money. So Dubinsky was a total man, and he was a very tough negotiator. There was a single major struggle in the ILG that Dubinsky was not involved in. And I know because I inherited a lot of that tradition when I became president. So that the president, in terms of the nature of the industry, because of the job or contractor relationship with the workers, manufacturers are in New York, the contractors are in Pennsylvania or in the South, cross borders. And the story is told about a major struggle in Philadelphia. And the employers were giving the union a hard time, and they asked Dubinsky to come in and help. And he said he'd come in and help negotiate a new agreement for them. And he came to a meeting, and the workers voted for a strike. He suggested that they vote for a strike, and they put up $10 for a strike fund. And the workers contributed $10 to the strike fund. He continued to negotiate with little hope. At the end, he negotiated an agreement, and he came to the meeting, and he announced the conditions, and the workers praising him, you know, applauding and applauding. And when he finished, they voted to support it. And then as the meeting was ending, the worker stood up and said, "President Dubinsky, what about the $10 for the strike fund?" And without hesitating, he turned and said, "I owe you a strike." He also had a sense of humor. It was kind of his background. But the key element of the concept of social unionism meant that we were involved in all phases of American life and the world. Within the union, I could spend an hour telling you what he did, whether it was establishing a retirement fund, pension fund, health funds, severance funds. I can go on and on and on. He restructured the union. Not only did it grow in numbers, but it grew in strength, it grew in power, and it grew in influence. Beyond that, within the labor movement, he was a major player in the AFL, helping from the merger of the AFL and the CIO. He had no limits to what he thought the union ought to do, because he thought that the world was a part of the labor movement's role, a mission to take the worker and make them a part of the world. And so when it came to international affairs, he was a major player, as described by our friend here. Well, the Parmet clearly spelled it out. Get his book, it's in paperback. Whether it was in Italy, whether it was in France, some of the other things he's done in his life, which I can't talk about, at the end of the war. Support. He was an anti-fascist and anti-communist. When it came to politics, the Liberal Party was a major player in New York. When John Kennedy was deciding to pick a vice president, he wanted to pick a friend from Texas. And he called Dubinsky, and he said, "I got this guy from Texas, he may be too conservative for you. His name is Lyndon Johnson. Is it okay with you?" Meaning, he was not only talking to Dubinsky as the president of the union with his influence, but as a major player because he couldn't win the presidency without New York. The Liberal Party was the balance of power. Dubinsky said, "No problem. Send him to New York. I'll have a rally for him." We had a meeting at the Astor Hotel, a couple thousand people. Johnson never forgot it. Never ever forgot it. They became close friends, but he was not only friends with Johnson, he was close friends with FDR, etc., as described by Brother Parmet. So the totality of his influence is well felt. He was not only a man for all reasons, he was a man for all seasons. He operated within the union, within the AFL, within the city, whether it was building houses, or sponsoring housing, or supporting a culture, or whether it was politics in the Liberal Party or the Democratic Party, because he was also active in the Democratic Party on a national level. The largest rally held Up till then was a Garment Center rally in 1960. The John F. Kennedy. Enormous. They estimated, somebody said there were 250,000 people there. I estimated probably 150,000 from 33rd Street, 34th Street to 40th Street on 7th Avenue, totally blocked off. So his influence was well felt, and he could turn them out. So it was totally appropriate, and I compliment Barbaralee for making the choice, and Ryan Siegel for promoting the idea more than her grandfather. They had a nice relationship. I used to see pictures of us sitting on the beach with Dubinsky. He was very good. He was not great with children, but he was good with her. He was also not too good with people, but he was good with her. So we won't get into that aspect of it. But he was a great leader, highly respected. I was in the ILG 15 years by the time he retired, so I knew who he was and how strong he was and how influential he was. In fact, there came a time, and I'll end with that, there came a time when they were describing Dubinsky or the ILG, they'd say Dubinsky's union. It was almost like ownership, because you couldn't talk about the ILG. The story is told that when Johnson wanted to speak to Dubinsky at home, he called and his housekeeper answered the phone. And the operator said, the president is calling. And she said, president of what? Because he'd get calls from a lot of presidents. So that was Dubinsky. His influence, his contribution is mighty and enormous in terms of leaving a legacy, and this plaque will do justice to his tenure as president of the union. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay Mazer, for your important work and for those very interesting, lively comments. Elizabeth de Leon Bargava was appointed Deputy Secretary for Labor by Governor Andrew Cuomo in 2015. She served as the first Deputy Chief of Staff for City Council Speaker Mark Viverito, and before that, Deputy Commissioner of the New York City Department of Small Business Services. She had intended to join us here today, but at the last moment was called to Albany. She has sent on some remarks to be read by Natasha Carbajal Evangelista, Assistant Secretary for Labor and the Workforce of New York State. We're very pleased to welcome you, Natasha.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Natasha Carbajal Evangelista, and I serve as the Assistant Secretary for Labor and Workforce for Governor Cuomo. In my role, I oversee 7 state agencies and boards that focus on labor and workforce issues, as well as managing governor programs like paid family leave and the implementation of $15 minimum wage. I'm honored to be here on the governor's behalf to give a very few brief remarks, but I have to tell you that I am personally thrilled as well. Elizabeth's loss was my gain. I am a proud class of 2000 graduate of Cornell University's School of Industrial and Labor Relations. And I remember in 1996, as a first year, reading about David Dubinsky, his rise to leadership of the ILG, his pioneering work in housing, pension plans, and health centers, and his significant role in the merger of the AFL and CIO. So thank you personally for this opportunity, and special thanks to Barbaralee, Diamonstein-Spielvogel, and Deborah Fairshad, and the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center for inviting the governor to participate in this very historic occasion. As the governor has said, New York is a union state, and we will do and will continue to protect union members and ensure that the labor movement continues to deliver on the promise of the American dream. Labor leaders like David Dubinsky, who was, as you've heard, in much better detail than I could ever capture, integral in the creation, unification, and preservation of the labor unions in New York, are to be celebrated. I'm happy to be here today to celebrate the dedication of this cultural medallion in his honor, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Natasha, and thank you for your very important work. Samuel Norwich, that many of you know, was named as Chief Executive of the Association and Publisher of the Yiddish Vorwärts in 1997 and became publisher of the English Forward in 2000. Born in Germany in 1947, he immigrated to the United States in 1957, attended college at Columbia University, and completed graduate study at the University of Wisconsin at Madison and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Before joining the Forward Association, he served as vice president of the World Jewish Congress and executive director of the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. He is not available today, but he sent on, I think, a very eloquent and interesting tribute to David Dubinsky, and I've asked Deborah, who works with me, to read an abridged version of it.
More than a generation after his death at age 90 in 1982, David Dubinsky's place in history as a leader of organized labor and as a political power, especially in his New York base, is well established. His reputation as a leader of American Jews during the pivotal middle decades of the 20th century is less so. Dubinsky rose to the critical challenges facing Jews in America and in Europe in his time. In the 30s, he was a leader in the fight against fascism and Hitler's threat to annihilate Europe's Jews. At a time when many in the American Jewish community were reluctant to take too public or strident a stance, the Jewish Labor Committee, which Dubinsky co-founded and co-chaired, helped mobilize hundreds of thousands of people in massive street demonstrations, boycotts of German goods, and opposition to anti-Semites and to German sympathizers in America. And in the midst of the Great Depression, Dubinsky persuaded the American Federation of Labor to support the easing of immigration restrictions that kept Jews from Europe from finding refuge in America. The Jewish Labor Committee managed to smuggle over 1,000 union leaders, social democratic activists, writers, and other cultural figures, Jews and non-Jews, out of the Nazis' clutches. In the end, all that Dubinsky and the JLC did, all that others did, was not enough to save European Jewry. But Dubinsky did more than almost any American citizen of his day. In the immediate post-war years, as 250,000 Jewish survivors of Nazi genocide were stuck in displaced persons camps in Germany, the JLC joined with other organizations in mobilizing American public opinion on their behalf and in finding adoptive homes for Jewish children orphaned during the war. In the years that followed the establishment of a state for Jews, the ILGWU, under Dubinsky's leadership, donated $1 million to create what became the Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba, Israel. That hospital is today the only major treatment and training center serving Jewish and Bedouin residents of the Negev region of Israel, as well as many Palestinian patients from Gaza and the West Bank. There is no Hitler on the world scene today. Israel is strong and American Jews are prosperous, well-established, and safe. But the threshold for our concern and our activism should not wait until threats to Jews and threats to democratic institutions reach the catastrophic levels of the middle of the 20th century. When the scourge of inequality in America is driven by regressive government policy, when asylum seekers and children seeking refuge in America are incarcerated and denied basic human rights, when racists seek to redefine and disfigure America as a white Christian nation rather than as a nation of all its citizens, we know that the bell now tolls for us. We need leaders to join that fight, as David Dubinsky did in his time. Samuel Norwich, President of the Forward Association. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel Norwich, again. Those were very moving words. The distinguished professor of history at Queens College and the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, Joshua B. Freeman, is also affiliated with CUNY's New School of Labor and Urban Studies. His most recent book, Behemoth, A History of the Factory and the Making of the Modern World, was published in February 2018 to widespread acclaim. He is the recipient of various awards and fellowships and is currently editing a collection of essays on the history of labor struggles in New York that will be published in May 2019. Welcome, Joshua Freeman.
Thank you. It's an honor to be part of the ceremony. A lot's been said already, and it's also cold, so I'll try to be brief and try to maybe just contextualize a little bit why we're here today. Labor unions and worker groups have been a central part of the history of New York for over 200 years. They've been active here since the age of the Revolution, all the way up to today. And New York unions and labor leaders in turn have played a very large role nationally and even internationally, as we've heard. But the contributions, the historical contributions of labor do not get a whole lot of public recognition, unfortunately. Many younger New Yorkers or newcomers really have no idea of how central organized labor has been to the history of the city. And then I think there are people like us who kind of know that, but we almost take it for granted. We just sort of see it as part of the landscape, and we don't really stop and think about how that landscape itself was formed in part as a result of the activities of working people through their organizations. So the placing of this cultural medallion today seems to me to be a small but very significant step in rectifying this kind of insufficient attention that we pay to the contributions of organized labor to the history of New York. And of course, who could better represent the importance of New York labor than David Dubinsky? And I'm not going to repeat, I would have repeated, but I won't repeat, what we've heard in terms of the details. But let me just stress a couple things about him, which is the boldness, and I think the audaciousness of the vision that he had for what working people and their organizations could do. And we've heard a bit about the expansiveness of the vision of the ILGWU under David Dubinsky's leadership. I think it's worth just to pause for a second and slow down and think about that. Workers had health problems. What did the union do? It created a huge medical clinic, which is now over 100 years old, to serve its workers. They couldn't take vacations. They created Unity House. Or take Penn South, just a couple of blocks from here. It was not the first worker-sponsored non-profit co-op in New York. The Amalgamated Clothing Workers had done it earlier. But what was amazing about this was not only were they going to build affordable housing for garment workers, they're going to do it smack in the middle of Manhattan, the kind of center of the universe, and they're going to do it so workers could walk to their jobs. What a bold vision, and they made it happen. And they made it happen under David Dubinsky's leadership. The same thing in terms of the great injunction, organize the unorganized. Labor always says it, doesn't always do it. But David Dubinsky, as Bob and Jay mentioned, was not only important in the ILG, he was a founder of the Congress of Industrial Organizations. And he helped launch the effort to organize factory workers all over America in the textile, in the auto, and the steel industry in the 1930s. The ILGWU gave the equivalent of modern dollars $6 million to the textile and steel organizing drives. It was the biggest single contributor, except for the mine workers, in the organization of the CIO. Dubinsky directly helped take the heartland of the American economy from a non-union to a unionized part of America. The same audacity in the political arena. We heard about the American Labor Party. Very few New Yorkers would know what you were talking about. This was not some little marginal group. It routinely got 500,000 votes when Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia wanted to run for re-election in 1937, the Republican Party didn't want to support him. And the only reason he got re-elected was because Labor, through the American Labor Party, supported him. The same thing happened in 1969 to John Lindsay. You know, there was a huge conservative backlash against the liberalism of the 60s and of John Lindsay. And he was denied the Republican nomination, and he was facing a conservative Republican and a conservative Democrat. And Dubinsky said the Liberal Party had to support him. It was very controversial. Dubinsky said this was the Stalingrad of New York liberalism, right? This was where we had to draw the line, because if Lindsay was defeated, it would be the end of the liberal tradition in New York. And Lindsay won, utterly improbably, only running on the liberal line, which Dubinsky and Alex Rose were the heads of. So this was a very audacious man with a very broad vision. He was also, you know, it's important to point out, a controversial person with lots of enemies. You know, a lot of the manufacturers, the owners didn't like him. Gangsters opposed him because they used to be parasitic on the garment industry. And there were wars inside the union. I think Bob mentioned that. You know, again, if you told a student today that David Dubinsky was a socialist, but he was called part of the right wing of the union, people would look at you like you were crazy. Like, what are you talking about? But, you know, in the fierce battles against communism that Dubinsky was part of, the communists were the left, he was the right. So he was a guy who took his knocks. He was not afraid of sticking his neck out. He didn't need to be involved, you know, but he had a huge impact. He came out of a kind of parochial world of Yiddish-speaking New York immigrant workers, and he built institutions and he promoted values that changed millions of people's lives. So it is really more than fitting that we today are here to inaugurate a memorial, a plaque, so that it will point future generations of New Yorkers to the extraordinary contributions that this man made. So, thank you very much.
You know, every time you said audacious, I kept on thinking of commitment. And I think what gives one the courage or the audacity is the depths of their commitment. And few people have greater commitment familially than Raina Siegel. Without Raina Siegel's initiation and perseverance, we would probably not be here today, even though I am very interested in labor unions, the union movement, and its current status in the fabric of our country. Raina, after she was graduated from Bryn Mawr College with a degree in art history, received a Master's of Art in Education. She was a practicing artist and teacher, specializing in monotype printmaking. As you know by now, she is the granddaughter of David Dubinsky. And as you know as well, this event probably would not have happened so soon without her initiative and dedication. Welcome, Raina.
Thank you, Barbara. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for being here on this chilly day. I am honored and proud that my grandfather is being celebrated today with this beautiful plaque and ceremony. Whoops. Okay. I think he would be delighted to be joining such distinguished New Yorkers as John Dewey, Marian Anderson, Fiorello LaGuardia, and Harry Hopkins. Friends and colleagues all, thank you. Thank you to everybody who has made this afternoon possible. To Barbaralee, Diamonstein-Spielvogel, Chair and Guiding Light of the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center, who was enthusiastic about the idea and made it all come together. To Jay Mazer, president of the 21st Century ILGWU Heritage Fund, who generously underwrote the fabrication of the medallion and the ceremony. To the residents of 201 West 16th Street, especially Edward Lewis, a vice president of the board, and Lynn Wanganeth, owner of what once was my grandparents' penthouse, who graciously let me revisit my childhood home, a rare privilege, and to the honored speakers for their presence and remarks, which give meaning to the day. The eminent John Dewey wrote an introduction to a wonderful pictorial history of my grandfather. Fiorello LaGuardia was a compatriot in many campaigns, and the great Marian Anderson graced the ILG's Unity House with her recitals, at one of which, all of 8, I presented her with a beautiful bouquet of red roses and looked into one of the most spiritual faces I have ever seen. To paraphrase Charles Dickens, I was born, and then I was here. I spent the first years of my childhood happily commuting between my apartment on the 16th floor and my grandparents' wonderful penthouse, a world unto itself at the apex of the building. It was here that Etta and Dave, as I call them, built me a log cabin where I spent many happy childhood hours playing cowboys and Indians, and where my dog Sammy and I enjoyed long summer afternoons cooling off with a terrace hose. It was here that I snuck into my grandfather's study, daringly painted black by my grandmother, to sniff and admire his pipes and endless supply of cigars, the cause of many torturous car trips. The penthouse was a wonderful and somewhat appropriate place, somehow appropriate place for my grandfather, even as he reveled in the hurly-burly of crowds and the tumult of people. Encircling the building with a sweeping view in all directions, it pointed to his past, his future, and many aspects of his life. North toward the garment district and the center of the commercial city, west over the brownstones of older New York and across the Hudson to New Jersey, south toward City Hall and the Statue of Liberty, immortalized to him from his transatlantic maiden journey to his new life in the New World in 1911. And finally east to the Lower East Side, where he lived in his first city home on Clinton Street and where his life began. It is by grace of his 1911 voyage and quest that I am an American. My grandparents were in their vital early 50s when I was born, and my grandfather was 13 years into his long and eventful ILGWU presidency. According to legend as related by my mother, Wendell Wilkie came here to dinner one night, and my grandmother, who was a very good cook, prepared a special dish that he praised by saying, if all men could eat this meal, there would be peace in the world. True or not, my grandmother's recipe was forever called the peace dish. It was here that my grandfather and I would start our long bike rides to Central Park, where Dee Dee would kibitz with a clan of serious racing enthusiasts, and we would then ride home again. He was what was known as a starker, a tough cookie, and he loved these half-day rides. This round-trip weekend ritual was captured one day by Alfred Eisenstadt on assignment for Life magazine, and it's a great picture. It was here that John Sloan painted a beautiful gouache of my grandparents and mother enjoying a summer day on the terrace, reading the papers and talking about world events. While my grandfather was a very public figure, For me, at 201 West 16th Street, he was my grandfather, a private and special person I loved and admired and tried to keep up with on my bike. This is where my early childhood memories rest. 201 West 16th Street played a long and a good role in my grandfather's and grandmother's life for many years. Dee Dee was eminently lovable, passionate and compassionate, and a true American and human success story. As a close family friend said, he was a great man, but he had the common touch. For me, he was Dave's when I was very young, or Dave. And I thank you sincerely, everyone, for being here and for everything you said. Very, very much appreciated.
Rhina, for providing us with this intimate glimpse. It was very informative and edifying. As Rhina pointed out when she referred to Marian Anderson, another one of the notable New Yorkers who are commemorated by cultural medallions. We have recently published a book, coincidentally entitled Notable New Yorkers, that has all 116 of the New Yorkers who over these past 20 years have been commemorated in each of the 5 boroughs. And if you'd like to see it, it is available at the New York Historical Society bookstore and the Whitney Museum bookstore. And it also tells the history of the program. I want to thank very warmly the speakers, the audience, but especially the speakers who gave the time and thought to provide such a meaningful and historic background. I hope you found it as significant as I did. If you know of an individual who has made as significant a contribution as today's honoree and have verifiable information where they resided in a building that still exists, please let us know. And now, the reason we have gathered together, and that is to ask Rhina and Jay Mazer to unveil the cultural medallion and read the text. And thank you again, each of you, for joining us here today, here where, as you've heard, history happened. Thank you.
David Dubinsky, February 22nd, 1892, September 17th, 1982, 201 West 16th Street, Manhattan. David Dubinsky, one of the most influential labor leaders in the United States, was president of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, ILGWU, from 1932 to 1966, escaping Tsarist imprisonment for his youthful political activities. He arrived in New York in 1911, working as a cutter in Local 10 of the ILGWU. He rose through the union's ranks to become president in 1932. Under his leadership, the ILGWU advocated for its members both within and outside of the workplace, and was an important social and political force nationally and internationally. They pioneered programs on workers' health, industrial training, civic and political engagement, built affordable housing for workers, and even produced a hit Broadway musical, Pins and Needles. Dubinsky helped found the American Labor Party, the Jewish Labor Committee, and the Liberal Party of New York. Awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1969, Dubinsky was inducted into the United States Labor Hall of, originally called Fame, now called of Honor, in 1993.